Anna held the leather journal against the faint light streaming through the library window. Its pages were yellowed, brittle, the handwriting faded to sepia. Her grandfather's meticulous notes from 1952, documenting expeditions into the Huasteca region of eastern Mexico. But the final entry stopped abruptly, mid-sentence, with a single word circled repeatedly: Cueva. "You're not actually considering this," Marco said from the doorway, arms crossed. Her brother had always been the practical one. While Anna spent her 20s earning her archaeology degree and publishing papers on Teenek settlement patterns, Marco had built a business, stable, predictable, safe. "He never finished his work here," Anna replied, turning the journal to show him a hand-drawn map. The cave system was marked with small symbols, her grandfather's shorthand for ritual spaces, refuse deposits, water sources. But there was something else, a peculiar series of dots connected by lines, and beside them 3 words in his rigid script: unknown ceremony, paint, proof. That was 70 years ago. Whatever he found, it's been claimed, documented, or destroyed by weather. Marco stepped into the room. "Anna, you know how these things work. Indigenous sites get picked over. They get lost. That journal could lead nowhere." "Or," Anna said quietly, "it could lead to something grandfather never got to document, something that could rewrite what we know about Teenek ritual practices." She traced her finger along the map. "He had photographs. They're not in here. That means he left them somewhere, or he hid them on purpose." Marco exhaled deeply. He knew that look. Anna had worn it the first time she descended into a cenote, the day she presented her thesis, the moment she decided to dedicate her life to understanding the hidden histories of people the world had largely forgotten. "I'm going to the Huasteca," Anna continued. "I'm going to find those caves, and I'm going to finish what grandfather started. Then I'm coming with you," Marco said. It wasn't an offer. It was the kind of commitment that only siblings understand, the weight of shared blood, shared memory, shared stubbornness. Anna closed the journal carefully, as if it might crumble into dust. Outside, the Mexico City afternoon hummed with traffic, with modern life, with the everyday world that had no idea what lay hidden beneath the limestone hills hours away. She thought of the caves, cool, dark, untouched. She thought of paintings that had survived centuries waiting in stone silence. She thought of her grandfather, a young man consumed by mysteries he couldn't solve, leaving behind only questions. "We'll need a guide," Anna said. "Someone who knows the region, someone who understands the local history." "And a budget," Marco added. "Professional equipment, transportation. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly." That night, Anna sent the first of many emails to university colleagues, to grant foundations, to officials at the National Institute of Anthropology and History. She attached photographs of the journal, transcriptions of the entries, her grandfather's field notes. The response came faster than she expected. Within 2 weeks, they had permits. Within 3, Diego, a local guide with deep ties to the Teenek communities, had agreed to lead them. Diego was cautious, protective of sacred spaces, but he understood that Anna's motivations were different. This wasn't about treasure or fame. It was about honoring what had been left behind. By the 4th week, Santiago had appeared, a businessman from Monterrey with financing and ambitions. He had read about their expedition in a funding announcement. He wanted to help, he said. He wanted to support archaeological work in the region. His offer was generous enough that they couldn't reasonably refuse. But Marco had noticed the way Santiago's eyes moved over the map, calculating distances, assessing value. "That one," Marco whispered when Santiago stepped away to take a call, "isn't here for history." Anna knew her brother was right. But the expedition had already begun to take shape, and stopping it now seemed impossible. Besides, she thought, Once they found what Grandfather had discovered, what Grandfather had deemed important enough to hide away, maybe then everything would become clear. Maybe then they'd understand if Santiago was simply an opportunist, or if he sensed something real in the caves ahead. The Huasteca waited, limestone and shadow, ancient and patient. Chapter 2. The Road to Stone Country. The mountains rose through the windshield like sleeping giants, their slopes covered in dense green that seemed to swallow the afternoon light. Anna sat in the passenger seat of the van, her notebook open, comparing her grandfather's sketches to the landscape unfolding before them. Every ridge, every valley seemed to match, but after 70 years, the forest had reclaimed so much. "The caves are deeper in," Diego said from the driver's seat, his hands steady on the wheel as they descended a narrow mountain road. He was in his 60s, with dark eyes that held generations of knowledge about this land. The Teenek people have stories about them. Some are places of ceremony. Others are just shelter from storms. My grandfather took me to one when I was young, but not to the ones your family was looking for. "How would you know which ones?" Marco asked from the back, where he sat checking equipment, ropes, harnesses, flashlights, first aid kits, documentation cameras. "Because the ones your sister's grandfather found, the ones with paintings that shouldn't exist, those are not the ones we speak of easily," Diego said. There was no judgment in his voice, only a kind of caution. If your grandfather kept them hidden, there was reason. Santiago sat beside Marco, studying a laptop where he'd pulled up satellite images of the region. His suit seemed out of place in the van, his cologne sharp against the smell of diesel and rain-dampened earth. "The cave systems in this area extend for kilometers," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Underground rivers, multiple entrances, complete ecosystems. If something was hidden deliberately—" "It was hidden to protect it," Diego interrupted quietly, "not to protect people from it." The distinction hung in the air between them. Anna felt it like a shift in pressure, the way air changes before a storm. They stopped in a small town as evening fell. Whitewashed buildings, a church with a stone cross, a few shops selling supplies and soft drinks. Diego knew the owner of the hostel, a woman named Maria, who prepared them a meal of beans, corn tortillas, and grilled fish. She didn't ask many questions, but her eyes followed them when she thought they weren't looking. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the mountain town settling into darkness. Dogs, insects, the distant call of something wild in the forest. She opened her grandfather's journal to the final entry and read it again. Each word like a breadcrumb left behind intentionally. The paintings are undeniable. The ceremony they depict, I have found no parallel in any documented Teenek ritual. The age is significant, the location more so. I must return with proper equipment, I must document everything, but I fear that if the wrong people learn of this place, the knowledge will be taken, the story will be rewritten by those who come from outside. I choose to hide this map, I choose to hide these photographs. Perhaps one day, someone will understand why. Ina closed the journal and pressed it against her chest. Tomorrow, they would leave the town. Tomorrow, they would enter the limestone country where caves breathed with centuries of secrets. Tomorrow, the search would truly begin. Outside her window, the mountains stood dark and silent, waiting. Chapter 3. The first entrance. The trail narrowed to barely a meter's width as they climbed deeper into the reserve. Vines hung like ropes across their path. The humidity was absolute, making every breath feel thick with moisture and the smell of wet earth, decomposing leaves, and something else, mineral sharp, the scent of stone water. Diego moved steadily ahead, his machete precise, never wasteful. Behind him, Anna kept her eyes on the landscape, cross-referencing every feature with her grandfather's sketches. A formation of exposed limestone that curved like a sleeping animal. A depression in the terrain that suggested underground collapse. The way the vegetation changed, becoming sparser, as if the cave system beneath drew moisture differently. "There," Diego said finally, stopping at the edge of a ravine. The entrance was vast, a cathedral of darkness cut into the mountainside. Vines framed it like a threshold between worlds. Cool air rose from within, carrying the mineral scent stronger now. Anna could hear water, not the roar of a river, but the deliberate drip and trickle of limestone dissolution, the sound of time made audible. "This is not the main entrance," Diego said. "This is one of 3. The others are hours away." He looked at Anna directly. "This is the one your grandfather marked on his map. The ritual entrance, your grandfather's notes called it." Marco began distributing the climbing gear. Harnesses, carabiners, ropes rated for serious cave work. Santiago stood apart, filming on his phone, his expression a mixture of anticipation and calculation. "The descent is 60 meters, Diego continued. "There's a ledge system below, natural steps mostly, but you have to understand what you're entering. This place is sacred to the Teenek people. My people use these caves for ceremony, for medicine, for connection to the ancestors. Whatever your grandfather found, whatever paintings are down there, they have meaning beyond archaeology." "I understand," Anna said. And she did. This wasn't about discovery in the sense of claiming or owning. This was about witnessing, about bearing testimony to knowledge that had been preserved in secret. They rigged the ropes, tested the anchors against a natural stone formation at the cave's lip. One by one, they began their descent, rappelling slowly into growing darkness, their flashlights revealing limestone walls polished smooth by underground rivers millions of years ago. The air grew cooler, the sound of water grew louder. When Anna's feet finally touched the ledge below, she stood for a moment in absolute darkness, waiting for her eyes to adjust. Then Diego was beside her, illuminating the space with his lamp, and her breath caught. The cave opening had revealed only the beginning. What lay before them was vast, a chamber that extended back into shadow, its walls carved by water into organic flowing shapes. And on those walls, faint but unmistakable, were handprints, dozens of them, red ochre, centuries old, the signature of people who had stood exactly where Anna stood now, asserting their presence in the stone. "They're here," Marco whispered, arriving last, his voice small in the enormity of the chamber. "Your grandfather found them." "Not just handprints," Diego said, directing his light deeper into the cave. "Come, there is more, much more." As they moved forward, Anna began to see what her grandfather had documented all those years ago. On the walls, not just handprints but images, stylized figures in ceremonial dress, geometric patterns that suggested movement and rhythm, symbols that seemed to track the passage of celestial bodies, and in the deepest part of the visible wall, a series of paintings that depicted something no one had catalogued before, a ceremony, a ritual involving what appeared to be multiple people arranged in patterns, their bodies adorned with elements that looked like feathers or water, their hands raised toward a central figure or object that was rendered in red and black pigment, shimmering in their lamplight like it was still alive. If you're enjoying this adventure so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Anna's mind raced with questions, theories, possibilities. This was it. This was what her grandfather had found and hidden. Not treasure in the sense of gold or jewels, but something far more valuable, a window into a ceremony that had been lost to time, to conquest, to the systematic erasure of indigenous knowledge systems. But as she stepped closer to examine the paintings more carefully, she noticed something else. Scratches in the stone. Recent scratches, the kind made by tools or climbing equipment. Someone else had been in this cave, recently, very recently, Behind her, Santiago was already filming, his camera steady, documenting everything. And Diego had gone very quiet, his face unreadable in the flashlight's glow. "We're not alone," Marco said, pointing to something Anna had nearly missed in her initial wonder. Beside the ancient paintings, someone had left a modern mark, initials carved deliberately into the stone, followed by a date, 2 weeks ago. Chapter 4. The second map. Back at the cave's entrance before the descent, they found what they should have noticed initially, a weathered metal box wedged between rocks, so carefully placed that it seemed almost invisible. Santiago discovered it while securing excess rope, and the moment his fingers touched the corroded surface, Anna knew this changed everything. Inside, protected by oilcloth, was another journal. Not her grandfather's. The handwriting was different, the style more modern, but contemporary to something, some expedition that had happened after her grandfather's time. The entries were fragmentary, written by someone who had studied the paintings, measured them, sketched preliminary diagrams. "Someone catalogued this," Marco said, scanning the pages. "Someone else knew about these paintings. Someone documented them with the intention of either protecting them or—" He trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. Diego had aged visibly. He sat on a rock, processing something internal. "My grandfather," he said finally, "was a guardian, a keeper of knowledge. In the 1980s, he told me that a man came from the government, an archaeologist, asking about caves with ritual paintings. My grandfather sent him away, but not before the man had bribed local people with money and promises. Some places were disturbed." The journal's owner had been meticulous. There were photographs, old color film faded to peachy tones, showing the ceremony paintings in vivid detail. Alongside the images, notes in Spanish documented theories about Teenek cosmology, about the connection between the depicted ritual and known astronomical alignments, about the possibility that this ceremony represented a lost tradition that predated Spanish contact. But the final entries were different. They spoke of pressure, of government interest, of being followed, of fear that the site would be claimed, exploited, turned into a tourist attraction, or stripped of its sacred context. The last page was dated 1987. It contained a single sentence: "I am hiding this knowledge because knowledge is also a responsibility. The paintings must remain undisturbed until someone comes who understands the difference between discovery and desecration." "Your grandfather?" Diego said to Anna, he understood that difference, and this person, whoever they were, they learned it from him. Santiago had been quiet, studying the photographs with intense focus. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted. The businessman veneer had cracked, revealing something more complex underneath. "This is bigger than archaeology," he said. "This is evidence of a continuous knowledge tradition, a ceremony documented by indigenous artists that no colonial record acknowledges. Do you understand what this means? This changes everything about how we understand Teenek spiritual practices during the post-conquest period." "What it means," Diego said quietly, "is that it needs to be protected. Not studied from the outside, not exhibited. Protected." Anna felt the tension crystallize between them. She had come seeking historical truth, but what they'd found was more than history. It was an assertion of indigenous knowledge systems that had survived conquest through secrecy, through being deliberately hidden from the eyes of those who would claim or destroy them. The paintings had survived because guardians like Diego's grandfather had kept their locations sacred. The second journal had survived because its author had understood that documentation could be both preservation and danger. And now Anna held this knowledge, with all its ethical weight. "We need to bring in the Teenek community," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Not government officials, not museum curators, the knowledge keepers who understand what this ceremony means. They get to decide what happens next. They get to decide if this knowledge is shared or kept in silence. Santiago nodded slowly. Agreed, he said, and something in his face suggested this had been his intention all along, or had become it during the moment he recognized what lay in that hidden chamber. Diego's shoulders eased slightly. Then we should contact my cousin. She is one of the ceremonial leaders. She will know what to do. As they began their ascent from the cave system, Anna realized they had found something more profound than either treasure or historical artifact. They had found a responsibility, and responsibilities she was learning were far heavier than gold. Chapter 5. The river below. The deeper chamber required descending through the secondary passage, the one Diego had mentioned but hadn't fully explained. It connected the upper ritual painting cave to an enormous underground river system that flowed through channels carved over millennia. To reach the lower chamber, they would have to navigate it. The water was cold and moved with surprising current. Diego led, his rope secured, testing depth and footing with each step. The limestone walls rose on either side, their surfaces slick with mineral deposit, ancient and unreasoned. Stalactites hung like teeth from the ceiling, their formations pristine because few humans ever ventured here. "Watch for the narrows ahead," Diego called back. "The water funnels, the current strengthens. It should be manageable, but storms upstream can change that quickly." Anna moved carefully, her headlamp catching the reflection of water on stone, creating an illusion of infinite depth. The sound was overwhelming, not menacing but complete, a constant reminder that they were moving through a living system, a place where geology still evolved in real time. It was Marco who noticed the changes in the cave walls. "Look," he said, pointing to areas where the natural limestone had been worked, deliberately shaped, channels carved that seemed to have no practical purpose for drainage or water management. "This is deliberate. Someone engineered this." Pre-Hispanic water management systems, Anna realized, her archaeological training recognizing the signature immediately. They weren't just using these caves, they were modifying them, creating specific flows, specific reservoirs. This was infrastructure. Diego was examining a series of stone markers along the wall, deliberately placed rocks that seemed to indicate measurement or demarcation. "My grandfather spoke of this," he said. "The ancestors created systems within the earth, systems for ceremony, systems for survival, systems for understanding the relationship between water and time." The river widened into an underground lake, its surface mirror-smooth, fed by a natural spring that emerged from a cave opening in the far wall. Above that opening, barely visible in their lamplight, were more paintings. These were different from the ritual ceremony depictions above. These were technical diagrams showing water flow patterns, seasonal variations, and most remarkably, mathematical notations that suggested sophisticated understanding of hydraulics and cyclical time. "Someone was tracking something," Santiago said, his engineer's mind grasping the implications. "Water levels, seasonal changes, perhaps astronomical phenomena. They were using the cave system as both a temple and an observatory. As they carefully approached the wall to examine the paintings more closely, Anna heard it, a subtle change in the sound of water, a shift in air pressure that made her ears pop. "Storm," Diego said simply. "Upstream, the water is coming faster now." The change was perceptible immediately. The river's surface began to ripple, then chop. The current strengthened. Above them, they could hear the rumble of water moving through upper channels, flowing downward, accelerating. "We need to move," Marco said, urgency in his voice. "Now." But they had one problem. The way they had entered was the only way out, and it lay downstream. They would have to move into the rising water, navigate the narrows with current that was becoming increasingly powerful, and reach the upper cave before the water rose enough to block the passage entirely. Diego began moving immediately, his experience in cave systems making him decisive. The cold of the water intensified as it rose, a few centimeters with each minute, the current's pull becoming more insistent. Anna focused on her footing, on maintaining grip on the rocks, on following Diego's exact path, because deviation meant the current could sweep her sideways, could trap her against the jagged formations. The narrows approached. The water roared. Her heartbeat matched its rhythm. "Keep moving," Diego called. "Don't stop, don't hesitate, move!" They pushed through where the passage compressed, where water that moments ago had flowed calmly now churned with velocity. Anna's breath came in rapid gasps, not from exertion, but from the cold shock of water now waist-deep, now chest-deep, now threatening to pull at her legs with force that required all her strength to resist. Behind her, she could hear Marco and Santiago shouting, encouragement or alarm, she couldn't tell. Then they were through. The passage widened, the slope increased, and they were clambering up the ascending path toward the ritual chamber, toward air, toward safety. They collapsed at the entrance of the upper cave, gasping, soaked, alive. Below them, the sound of water continued its violent acceleration, the river reclaiming its ancient domain, rising into the chamber they had just left, covering the diagrams and paintings they had been studying, preserving them once more in darkness. That, Marco said between breaths, was too close. Diego was already checking equipment, assessing what they might have lost, but his focus was steady. He had moved through water and stone like someone who understood that survival was about respecting systems far older and more powerful than human intentions. "The cave tells you when to leave," he said quietly. "You listen, you don't argue, you respect." Chapter 6. The Watcher. It was Marco who first noticed they weren't alone in the valley. The next morning, preparing their secondary exploration of the eastern chamber, he had climbed above the cave entrance to scout a safer route for equipment transport. When he descended, his expression had hardened into something unfamiliar. "Someone's been watching us," he said flatly. "There's a camp about 1 kilometer northeast, footprints, gear, a tent hidden in vegetation. Someone's been tracking our movements since we arrived in the region." Diego's reaction was immediate and severe. He moved to the cave's edge and used his binoculars to scan the distant hillside. "That's Santiago's doing," he said, and there was something like anger in his voice. "The businessman. He's brought security, he's brought cameras, he's preparing for something." Anna felt the implications settle like stone. They had trusted Santiago because his financing made the expedition possible. But his questions about accessibility, about documentation, about the potential historical and cultural significance of the site, what if those questions had never been innocent? "We need to confront him," Marco said. But Santiago was already approaching, his phone in hand, his expression a careful mask of concern. "I apologize," he said, not waiting for accusation. "I hired a small security team, not to spy on you, to protect the site. I realized once I understood what we'd found that we needed to ensure the location wasn't compromised. I was planning to tell you." It sounded reasonable. It was expertly presented. But Diego's jaw remained set, and Anna recognized a truth unspoken between them. Santiago's motives had never been purely academic. "What exactly are you protecting the site for?" Anna asked quietly. Santiago hesitated, a moment of calculation visible across his features. Then, "For proper documentation, for international preservation funding, for ensuring that when this discovery becomes public, it's framed correctly. Because if we don't control that narrative, someone else will. The Mexican government will claim it. International universities will try to extract artifacts. Treasure hunters will destroy it. Or," Diego said, his voice hard. My people get to determine what happens to our own heritage. That was supposed to be the plan. That is still the plan, Santiago said, but the tension in his voice revealed doubt. But you need to understand, a discovery of this magnitude doesn't stay secret. Once we contact the ceremonial leaders, once we bring in community knowledge keepers, word will spread. And when it does, every person with an agenda will come looking. The government, collectors, archaeologists, journalists. We need to be prepared for that. We need to document everything now, while we can control the conditions. Anna understood the logic. She also understood that it was a logic that had justified the appropriation of indigenous knowledge for centuries. We make our own decision, Marco said. We document what we choose to document. We share what we choose to share, with the community leaders first. That's the agreement. Santiago nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. Because the window to study this site safely is closing. The rain season is coming. In 2 weeks, the water will rise significantly. The underground systems will be impassable. We have 12 days to document the paintings, the water management systems, and the astronomical correlations. After that, this becomes inaccessible until the dry season. It was true. The weather patterns in the Huasteca were unforgiving. The window for cave access was finite. And your security team? Diego asked. We'll stay back, Santiago said. They're here to prevent intrusion from outside parties, not to monitor our work. That was a mistake on my part. I should have been transparent. But something in his eyes suggested the security team would remain close, would continue documenting, would ensure that whatever happened in these caves in the next 12 days would be recorded, preserved in ways that gave Santiago leverage regardless of what other decisions were made. Anna recognized the move. It was the way power worked in these situations. Not through force, but through control of information, through having copies, through ensuring that no matter what agreements were made, the discoverer maintained advantage. If this treasure hunt already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. That night, she called Diego's cousin, the ceremonial leader named Rosa. The conversation was in Spanish, and Anna explained everything. The paintings, the water systems, the diagrams, the discovery they'd made. She explained their commitment to letting the community determine the site's future. Rosa was quiet for a long time. Then, my grandfather knew about these caves. He was told about them as a test, to see if he would protect sacred knowledge or try to exploit it. He chose protection. That became his responsibility and his honor. Tell me, Anna, what are you choosing? Protection, Anna said without hesitation. And truth. But I don't know how to do that when people like Santiago are already working against the decision. Then you document it yourself, Rosa said. You and your brother and Diego. You create an alternative record. You ensure that when the community decides what story gets told, we have access to the full truth. The way the knowledge keeper intended it, not the way someone with an agenda wants to frame it. When Anna hung up, she understood what the next 12 days would require. Not just scientific documentation, but a kind of archaeological resistance, working alongside the community, ensuring that knowledge stayed with its people and being willing to hide things again if necessary. Sometimes, she realized, protection and discovery were not the same thing. Chapter 7. The ceremony revealed. The astronomical alignment became evident on the 7th day. Anna had been cross-referencing the ceremony paintings with the water management diagrams, looking for correlations that might explain the relationship between human ritual and the engineered systems. It was Marco who noticed the mathematical patterns, measurements carved into the rock that suggested angles that tracked celestial positions relative to specific points in the cave system. "These marks," he said, his voice tight with revelation, "they correspond to Venus cycles. And there, that mark, it aligns with what would have been visible from this cave on the winter solstice approximately 500 years ago." Diego examined the measurements, then walked to a specific point in the chamber. He stood there for a moment, then called them over. "Stand here at sunset," he said, "during the winter solstice." They would test it, but Anna already knew what they would discover. The ancient Teenek people had engineered this cave system with astronomical precision. They had created a temple that tracked celestial movements, that used light and shadow to mark sacred time, that integrated human ceremony with cosmic cycles. The paintings depicted the ritual itself, a ceremony conducted during the winter solstice, involving dozens of participants arranged in patterns that matched the astronomical alignments. The water systems weren't random, they were calibrated to flow differently depending on seasonal variations, creating acoustic effects and light patterns that enhance the ceremony's sensory experience. "This was sophisticated cosmology," Santiago said, filming continuously. "This was institutional knowledge. This was a complete system for understanding the universe's structure." But it was Diego who explained what it meant. "My people," he said quietly, "were engineers, mathematicians, astronomers, not in the way that Europeans were, not through written systems and instruments, but through observation, through memory, through integration with the land itself. This cave is a textbook. All the knowledge is preserved in stone and water and geometry." Rosa arrived the next day with 3 other community members, knowledge keepers who had dedicated their lives to understanding Teenek heritage. As they walked through the painted chambers, as they traced the astronomical markers and examined the water systems, their reactions ranged from tears to silence to vocal affirmation. "This is the ceremony of the winter return," Rosa explained, running her fingers carefully along the painted figures. "It was performed until the Spanish conquest disrupted the calendar system. Our people tried to preserve it within other rituals, but the direct knowledge was lost. Except here, my ancestors painted it in stone, knowing that someday someone would read it." She pointed to specific figures in the ceremony painting. "That one represents the waterkeeper, the person responsible for the water systems. That one is the sky watcher, the astronomer. That one is the ceremony holder. All of them together they enacted the cosmological renewal." And as Rosa explained the ceremony's meaning, Anna felt something shift in her understanding of history. The Spanish conquest hadn't simply interrupted a civilization. It had hidden knowledge systems so completely that for 5 centuries the world had assumed Teenek people were simple hunters and gatherers. But here, in stone, was evidence of sophisticated engineering, mathematics, and cosmology that rivaled anything produced in Europe during the same period. "This changes everything about how your people's history gets told," Santiago said, still filming. "This explains everything about how our people survived," Rosa corrected. "This knowledge, kept secret, kept in caves, kept alive through ceremony and oral tradition, this is what allowed us to endure. The Spanish couldn't conquer what they couldn't see, and we preserved what they couldn't find." Over the next days, they created multiple documentation systems. Anna and Marco recorded video narration explaining the astronomical correlations. Rosa led the community members in performing segments of the winter solstice ceremony, not for outsiders, but as an act of reclamation, enacting knowledge that had been driven underground, bringing it back into living practice. Diego's security team remained in the background, but Anna noticed they had changed. Their cameras were filming, yes, but they were filming the community's own documentation. They were recording knowledge in a way that ensured it couldn't be claimed as discovery by outsiders. "What happens to this when you leave?" Santiago asked Anna one evening as they sat at the cave's entrance, watching the valley darken. "It stays with the Teenek people," Anna said simply. "Rosa's community will decide what gets shared publicly and what remains for internal knowledge transmission. My documentation will be part of the community archive, not published in academic journals. Your security team's footage will be held in trust. If anyone tries to exploit this, tries to commercialize it or claim it as discovery, we have a record of what was done here, by whom, and for what purpose." Santiago was quiet, processing. Then, "That's wise," he said, and Anna heard genuine respect in his voice. "That's how it should have been done from the start." Chapter 8. The risk. It came on day 10 without warning. The government team arrived in the valley with trucks and officials, armed with documentation of the site's location and authorization to conduct a formal archaeological survey. Someone had reported the discovery. Someone had broken the agreement. Anna's first instinct was to blame Santiago, but his reaction, the anger, the betrayal on his face, suggested his surprise was genuine. The official survey team leader, a bureaucrat named Dr. Reyes, approached with official paperwork that claimed the site for the Mexican government's cultural patrimony program. "This is a nationally significant archaeological site," Reyes announced, his tone brooking no negotiation. "All artifacts, all documentation, all research must be conducted under government supervision. Your permits are revoked. You're to cease work immediately." Diego moved between Reyes and the cave entrance. "This is Teenek's sacred space. The government has no authority here." "The government has authority everywhere within Mexican national territory," Reyes replied coldly. "These caves will be assessed for their historical value, and decisions will be made about preservation and potential public access. The community will be consulted, of course, but ultimately heritage sites of this magnitude are national treasures." Anna felt rage crystallize into focus. They had fought to protect this knowledge, and a bureaucratic process designed centuries ago to appropriate indigenous heritage was reasserting itself with casual authority. It was Rosa who acted decisively. She contacted journalists, indigenous rights reporters with connections to national media. Within hours, the story had shifted from "new archaeological site discovered" to "Teenek community reclaims hidden knowledge." News outlets began covering the tension between government authority and community sovereignty. Indigenous rights organizations issued statements. The political pressure was immediate and substantial. By evening, Dr. Reyes was in communication with federal officials, receiving new instructions. The team's mandate was revised. Instead of asserting government control, they would now document the site with Teenek community oversight. Instead of moving artifacts to museums, protocols would be established for community-based conservation. Instead of making decisions, bureaucrats would facilitate decisions made by the knowledge keepers themselves. It was a partial victory. The government hadn't relinquished all authority, but the threat of immediate appropriation had been forestalled. Santiago's security team had recorded everything: the government arrival, the community response, the renegotiation of authority. Later, he explained his thinking. "I recorded it because I wanted evidence that this knowledge was being reclaimed by its rightful people. If the story ever gets distorted, if someone tries to claim credit for preservation or discovery, the truth is documented." It was a different kind of ownership, not possessing knowledge, but ensuring that the power to tell its story remained with those who had preserved it. That night, Diego taught them the winter solstice ceremony, at least the portions that could be shared with outsiders. They moved through the painted chamber, standing at the astronomical markers, understanding how light and ritual had been synchronized with cosmic movement. It was beautiful and technical and sacred all at once, the integration of human knowledge with universal patterns. Anna realized that this was what her grandfather had understood 70 years ago. This was why he had hidden his photographs, not to keep the knowledge secret, but to prevent its appropriation, to ensure that when the time came for it to be recognized, it would be reclaimed by its people, not claimed by outsiders. Chapter 9. The Inheritance Complete. On the final day in the caves, Anna stood alone in the ritual chamber, her grandfather's journal in her hands. She had come to understand that inheritance wasn't about possessing something. It was about recognizing responsibility. The paintings surrounded her, 500 years of testimony, of memory, of knowledge kept alive through stone and pigment and secret transmission. Her grandfather had found them and made a choice to protect them. Now she was making a different choice, the choice to facilitate their reclamation by the people who had created them. Marco found her there, sitting beneath the ceremony paintings, and sat beside her without speaking. He knew, Anna said finally. Grandfather knew that if he documented it, it would be taken, so he documented it anyway, but hid it where only family would find it. He left it for someone like us, someone who could choose to protect rather than exploit. We did okay, Marco said. The community controls the site now. They control the narrative. They control what happens next. We did our job, Anna agreed. We finished what grandfather started, but more than that, we stopped what colonial history has been doing. We interrupted the pattern. Over the next weeks, as they prepared their departure, Anna saw the effects of the decision spread through academic and governmental channels. The Teenek community's documentation of the winter solstice ceremony became its own form of publication, not in peer-reviewed journals, but in community archives, in educational programs for Teenek youth, in cultural preservation initiatives. The astronomical correlations were understood not as archaeological discovery, but as indigenous scientific knowledge being reclaimed. The water management systems became a model for understanding pre-Hispanic engineering sophistication. The ceremony paintings shifted from being artifacts to being living knowledge, practices that could be enacted, understood, and transmitted as part of ongoing cultural practice. Government officials eventually produced a report that acknowledged the site's significance while recognizing community sovereignty. Museums that had been considering acquisition requests received formal notification that such acquisition would not be permitted. Academic journals published papers, yes, but with Teenek co-authors, with community approval, with acknowledgement that this was community-controlled knowledge sharing, not research extraction. 3 months after they left the caves, Anna received a message from Rosa. It contained photographs of the winter solstice ceremony being performed by a group of 40 Teenek people, children and elders, knowledge keepers and students. They were conducting the ritual in the painted chamber itself, using the astronomical alignments her grandfather had documented, enacting knowledge that had been hidden but never lost. The cave has given back what was taken, Rosa's message said. And we have reclaimed what was ours. Your grandfather's work is complete, so is yours. Anna understood then what legacy truly meant. It wasn't about glory or credit, or even the satisfaction of discovery. Legacy was about recognizing that some knowledge belonged to specific people, that some stories had rightful keepers, and that protection could be more valuable than publication. She placed her grandfather's journal on her shelf beside the photographs Rosa had sent, beside the recordings she had made but would never publish. The Teenek people had reclaimed their painted chamber, their astronomical alignments, their ceremony. The cave had been given back to its people. That, Anna thought, was the real treasure. And the greatest inheritance wasn't what you discovered. It was what you chose to protect. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of discovery and hidden history. See you in the next adventure.